On April 28, 1905, the Breathitt County News of Jackson, Kentucky, reported the court statements made by J.B. Little. In his statements, he would talk about his conversation with Cockrill shortly before the shooting and the consequences he faced for testifying for the Commonwealth. Come along with us as we walk through the events of the shooting of Cockrill as seen through J.B. Little's eyes. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up that time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking on the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine, but it convinces the YouTube algorithm that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. Moments before the shooting. J.B. Little was called to the stand, sworn in, and began giving his testimony to the court. First, Little will talk about how long he knew Cockrill and Hargis. He will also talk about who he was standing with when he was having a conversation with Cockrill. Quote, the next witness was J.B. Little, who had known Cockrill since his lifetime, and also knew Jim Hargis and the men jointly indicted with him. Was talking to Cockrill just about 5 minutes before the shooting in front of the courthouse. Said King Ford was also talking to Cockrill and left him and entered the Hargis store, unquote. While Little was talking to Cockrill, he noticed movements of people around him. He was observant enough to notice the sour look that Breathitt threw towards Cockrill and that his actions seemed to be that of someone who had been drinking. Quote, witness said that he saw Elbert Hargis leave the store and go down the street just before the shooting. While witness was talking to Cockrill, Bill Breathitt came out of the store and walked past Cockrill and gave him an unfriendly look. Said that Breathitt looked as though he had been drinking and that Cockrill seemed to be very nervous as Breathitt passed by and looked at him. Breathitt entered the post office and asked for Hargis Brothers mail and returned to the store with some papers in his hand. Breathitt did not speak as he passed, but gave a sharp look at Cockrill, and the latter turned and followed Breathitt with his eyes until after Breathitt had left the post office and returned to the store. Unquote. Was Breathitt staggering in his walk? Did he reek of alcohol? Was his clothing and hair disheveled? Although the article does not tell us why Little thought that Breathitt had been drinking, it is interesting that Little brought this observation up during his testimony. Another interesting thing that Little said was that Cockrill looked nervous. If we go back to the Hargis-Cockrill feud story, it seems that Cockrill had been forewarned about the men wanting to kill him. Cockrill was told this by a woman that he had been dating, and he promised her that after he concluded his business with his attorney, that he would leave town. It seems that Cockrill never got that chance. The events of the shooting. Little continues his testimony with what happened during the time that Cockrill left his company to what he witnessed in the alley. Quote, witness said that Cockrill told him that he had some business to transact with attorney John Patrick, and they separated. Cockrill started up the stairway to Patrick's office, and Little went down the street to Davis' store on the corner just below. Just as Little entered the store, he heard shots and stepped out and saw Cockrill stagger into the alley. Little ran to where Cockrill had fallen and was followed by Will Jett and Elbert Hargis. He heard Hargis ask C.X. Bowling if Cockrill was dead, and being answered in the affirmative, he said to Jett, quote, let's go, unquote. Witness said Elbert Hargis seemed to be very nervous, unquote. Now, this testimony differs from others. According to Little, Cockrill was starting up the stairs to go to Attorney Patrick's office when the shooting began. According to other witnesses, Cockrill was crossing the street and caught in the crossfire. Also, that Cockrill was dodging bullets as best as he could to get to safety, but did not make it and died in the middle of the street. Other witnesses places the shooting of Cockrill in front of a store and he was using the railings and columns as a shield. Still other witnesses claimed that Cockrill was trying to make an arrest of several people inside of a store who were drunk. Could this be the reason why Little stressed the condition of Breathitt? That perhaps on the way to Attorney Patrick's office that he was going to stop and make arrests? Little places Cockrill dying in an alley. Could the street that is being described by the other witnesses be in fact an alley? Could Attorney Patrick's office be inside of the courthouse or inside of a store? It is not that we doubt the testimony of Little, but on the point of exactly where James Cockrill died seems to be a little confusing, and it seems that several sources each claim a different version of the actual events. This is the problem with witnesses. Each person sees things through the lens of their own perspective and experience. If the witnesses were not allowed to speak to each other in between the events and the trials, then we would have a more pure product of the truth. However, this trial took place 3 years later, and the witnesses had talked to each other. So it is up to you, our 13th juror, to determine which version seems the most plausible. Little talks about Jett and White. The trouble really begins for Little in what he does during the arrest and trial of Kurt Jett and Tom White. He was appointed a special eleaser to act as a sheriff in the arrest of the men. He would also testify in their trials. Quote, in answer to a question, Little said that he and Jim Hargis had been on friendly terms for 12 or 13 years prior to the trial of Curtis Jett at Cynthiana for the murder of Cockrill. Said he assisted in the arrest of Tom White and acted as special eleaser with his uncle C.J. Little during the trial of Jett and White for the murder of J.B. Markham. Was at Cynthiana as a Commonwealth witness during the trial of Curtis Jett for the murder of Cockrill, and after that trial returned to Jackson. Unquote. First, let's find out what a special eleaser is. The best definition that we could find would be used today under the California law. An eleaser is a person who is appointed by a court of law to perform a special function when a party refuses to cooperate. This is usually used in the case of an execution of a deed or a document. However, at that time, a special eleaser can be used to do the duties such as the arrest in the stead of a sheriff, coroner, or marshal. In this case, we have a dead marshal, a co-conspirator in the sheriff and judge. So there was a need for someone to step in their places to execute the warrants of arrest. So legally, Little had every standing to act in this capacity. He was also called to testify, which he did so. He claims that he was friendly with the family for many years before this came out. But this relationship would now turn for the worse, and Little would find out what it meant to be on the wrong side of the Hargis faction, and it was not a place you wanted to be. Trouble on a train ride. From his testimony, we can gather that even though Little had to arrest Jett and White, he really had no ill will toward the Hargis clan. He thought of it as simply doing the job that he was assigned to do. However, the Hargises did not feel this way and felt that Little should have refused. Little would not know what trouble he was in until the train ride. Quote, Little said that on the day the soldiers were recalled from Jackson by the governor, that he had business down the road and boarded the train and went to one of the stations near Jackson. On the same train were Jim Hargis and Doug Hayes, both of whom got off the train at Oakdale. Witness said on the return trip that afternoon, Hargis and Hayes got on the train at Oakdale and entered the rear coach and took a seat almost directly opposite him. Hargis carried a shotgun and seemed to have been drinking hard, and was more under the influence of liquor than Witness had ever seen him before. Witness supposed that they had been hunting and asked Hayes what luck they had. At this juncture, Hargis began cursing Little violently and threatened to shoot him for testifying against his relatives. Little said that he did not respond to anything he said as he believed his time was about come, and he knew that to say anything at that time meant certain death. This abuse continued for a distance of several miles until the train reached Jackson. As Witness started to leave the train, he was followed by them, and just as he started to leave the platform, he was given a hard kick by Hargis. Little said that it was very dark when the train reached Jackson, and that he at once went to the hotel, where he told of this attempt of violence on the part of Hargis. Unquote. This would end the testimony given by Little. However, we do see a couple of things here. Hargis seemed to be under the influence of liquid courage on the return trip. Was this because Little was acting in a special capacity for the court? That Hargis needed the extra boost to confront Little? Hargis seems to have no trouble in confronting other people before this point. After all, he was a judge in his own right. But Little seems to be the second witness on the stand that either had to go to Hargis man to man or otherwise ran afoul of him. Another interesting thing that happens here is that Little was kicked in the dark before leaving the platform of the train station. Little points out that Hargis was the man guilty of this assault. While Little did turn in Hargis for doing this, it seems that no charges were brought against the man for his actions. In next week's video, we will continue with the Commonwealth of Kentucky's case when S.S. Talby will take the stand. Talby is a county court clerk who will bring some very interesting records with him. Thank you. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian feuds. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notification button. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries in Appalachian history.